Hey everybody, this is Geoff Livingston. Welcome back to the Show Me podcast. We are doing part 2 of our 911 episode with Lieutenant Colonel Bob Darling, United States Marine Corps retired, author of 24 Hours Inside the President's Bunker. And we're going to skip the usual intro just out of respect to all the people that paid handsomely and horribly with their lives on that day, and also afterwards for several of the people that came to the rescue of folks in New York and also in D.C. and eventually caught sicknesses and illnesses because of that stuff. So with that, we left off episode 1, and we were talking about Vice President Cheney literally giving the order to shoot down Flight 93. Roughly, that was about 9:50 or so?
Well, we found out that we had an inbound plane at 9:52. So about 9:55, he gave the order to the National Military Command Center to launch the 2 F-15 that were on alert, F-15 fighter aircraft, U.S. Air Force F-15s, and you are cleared hot, weapons free to engage.
Right.
Stop that aircraft from reaching Washington, D.C.
Now, you guys are in full operation mode in the bunker, so I bet at that point you're just tracking this thing very closely and also maintaining kind of everything that's happening as well. And then all of a sudden, boom, this photo happens. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, and I highly recommend you watch this on YouTube, this is a very visual episode. Bolivar Arellano's photo here, just insane, right? Here's the South Tower coming down, and just in the middle of coming down, this massive collapse of a 100-story skyscraper with people still trapped inside of it. We all watched this happen live, but what was going on in the bunker?
It was 9:59. Somebody was yelling up back to the vice president and all of us that CNN is reporting that the South Tower of the World Trade Center has just collapsed. I'll never forget this moment because what people were seeing on TV was not something they were able to mentally or visually comprehend at the moment. They started screaming back almost directly at the TV saying, "That's not true, Mr. Vice President. Maybe we lost the first couple floors. Maybe. And literally, he waved his hand in front of his face and told everybody just to stop. And does anyone know how many people work there?
Wow.
And someone yelled out, "Sir, there are 7 buildings in the World Trade Center complex. There's 50,000 people in those 2 buildings alone, about 25,000 people each in those towers." And he literally flipped over a sheet of paper and started to scribble and yelled out, "Get me the president."
Wow. And you still haven't talked to the president at this point, right?
It was the first time I heard the vice president talking to the president at this time, right after that. Now, whether he had a conversation with the president before that moment or not, maybe it was just out of my purview. But this is the first time I heard Vice President Cheney talking directly to the president of the United States.
Wow. Just a huge emotional moment. I mean, for me, we were talking between the breaks. I mean, when I saw this, it just wrecked me. I was crying, I was bawling. When I see this photo, it's still it brings that feeling back. I feel very, very upset when I see it. It was, I think this is really the moment when we realized how horrific these attacks were.
Yeah, I totally agree. The scale of the attacks became real to all of us.
Yeah, it was just shocking. And then literally 4 minutes later, Flight 93 goes down. And, there are all those conspiracy theories that are out there because of what we heard about the vice president ordering the flight down. But this was an act of heroism. Is that right?
It was a complete act of heroism. Flight 93 was ordered shot down.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is 38 people boarded that airplane as strangers. And after talking to loved ones, realized we had 3 planes.
Yeah, they were talking on their phones, right? And
they
on the plane phones.
And it's almost
those old swipe plane phones.
Remember that from the back of the seat, right?
Yeah.
And then so some were talking on those phones. Other people had cell phone reception. We're assuming because the aircraft was so low. It was coming in at 500-600 feet at 500 miles an hour. It was so low.
Wow.
And they had cell reception. We're assuming. Well, that plane was ordered shot down, but these passengers had something to say about that. And after talking to loved ones on the phone, they realized 3 planes and 3 targets. They united themselves. The Tom Burnett's and Todd Beamers and, like I said, 38 others came up with a plan. We believe they stormed the cockpit, got through the cockpit door. If there even was a door at that time, it might have been an open cockpit. But they literally got hands-on terrorists, according to the air traffic control or FAA tapes. And that plane rolled completely inverted and hit straight down in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at over 500 miles an hour.
Wow. And when did you guys realize that it was not one of us that had shot it down, one of our planes, but it was...
It was a good 30, 45 seconds later. We assumed when we first heard the aircraft was down that the F-15s actually took lethal action and downed that aircraft. And then within 30 or 45 seconds, those same satellite radios, we call them SATCOMs, satellite radios blared back to life that the F-15s never fired. The F-15s never fired.
That's crazy. Were you guys happy that had happened, actually?
It was a bittersweet moment. We were so elated that the United States Air Force, the U.S. military, didn't take lethal action against a civilian airliner that was hijacked, killing Americans. But at the same time, we were so saddened by the loss of life from another aircraft hijacked and innocent Americans being taken out of the sky, killed by a group of calculating Islamic fanatics whose truly their mission that day was to kill as many Americans as possible.
Right.
It was very clear to all of us.
Wow. So now this plane is down. Are you tracking more planes? I know you shut down all flights at some point. How quickly did that happen?
Right after we got past United Flight 93, that it was like the day changed. It was the president now was airborne. He was talking to the vice president, and right away one of the first orders that were given was to clear the airspace over the United States. First time in our history. We didn't want ground stops at Los Angeles, New York, and Boston. We were going to land every single aircraft, non-military, in the skies immediately.
Whatever airport they were closest to.
That's right. Air traffic control was now tasked by the Secretary of Transportation under the orders of the Vice President.
Who's in the bunker with you,
Who's in the bunker with us that day to clear the skies. He immediately calls the Herndon, Virginia Command Center, and the FAA immediately says, boss, we don't have the manpower to clear over 2,000 aircraft out of the skies simultaneously. We're here to help, but we don't have that type of radar coverage and manning. And as soon as they said that, on all the same military satellite frequencies, you heard, this is the North American Aero Defense Command. This is NORAD.
Wow.
We are assuming airspace control over the United States. If you're not a military aircraft, you're no longer authorized to be in the skies over America. Land immediately, land immediately, land immediately. And they kept broadcasting this. Our FAA, our air traffic controllers, became a subordinate agency to the United States Air Force to help them sequence all this airline traffic, commercial aviation traffic, general aviation traffic, for the first time in our history to get every aircraft on the ground, coast to coast.
And that's insane. How long did that take?
It wasn't instant. I'll tell you that. It probably took an hour, but you're talking about starting that day with 4,500 aircraft in the sky of all types.
Right.
And then at 2,000 plus is when the order went out. And within an hour, we had the skies cleared over America. Every aircraft was on the ground.
And that was just to make sure nothing else got hijacked.
That was the quickest way to shut it down. Because
Right.
if you couldn't ascertain how many aircraft might be hijacked, the best thing is to shut it all down. First time in history, we shut it all down.
Wow. Meanwhile, we've had the South Tower down. This last flight is down, but we have the people in the North Tower, and they know they're going to die, and they're jumping out of the building. When did we turn to New York from a recovery standpoint on a national level?
Those images that you're showing here about people leaping out of those towers are really just, they're unimaginable. They're just, you try to understand what's going through their minds at that point, that they feel they have no recourse but to jump out of a 100-story building. It's about the saddest image I've ever seen in my life. But at that point, all eyes, all resources, all attention is given really to New York City to get a federal response up there to try to help those first responders in hospitals. And the president, it was foremost on his mind was New York City and the American public and getting our country secure from the attack from these terrorists.
Right. And did we all know at that point the North Tower was going to come down?
I don't believe we knew. I think we are shocked that we lost the South Tower as quickly as we did.
Right.
And then having the South
Tower. It was
Tower.
the second tower hit, right?
The South Tower was the second tower hit, but the first tower to fall. Mm. And at that point, we were all hoping that the first tower was hit so high up that maybe we have a chance of that tower actually surviving the impact. And unfortunately, with jet fuel and a 757 type impact, the girders weakened, the heat rose 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it just failed to steel.
Wow. And then it came down, and I mean, we've seen tons of photos of this. This just happens to be a photo by Suzanne Plunkett, but where we see these billowing clouds of smoke, flying through the streets in New York, swallowing up the pedestrians, and the tower's down. Tell us what's going on now.
10:28, the North Tower collapsed. Vice President Cheney then staring at the TV set. We had two 110-story buildings on the ground in a city of 8 million people. The 5 boroughs. He just turned and said, "Get me the president." The president immediately, now airborne, came up on the frequency on the net. And he said to him, "Mr. President, sir, we just lost the North Tower." He was already aware we lost the South Tower. It is my best guess that we have 40,000 dead Americans in the city of New York.
Right. How come it was only 2? Is it because it was so early, and then people weren't at work? What was going on that day?
Well, because of the heroes that were taking action in New York City. Because of the Port Authority police officers, the NY Fire Department, the NY Police Department, ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things to go save the life of a stranger. Shopkeepers opening up their stores, ferry boat captains driving across the island, people doing whatever it took to take a stranger out of harm's way. And as a result of that, the 40,000 casualty figure became down to 2,766 ultimate casualties of a day. And I think if I said that right, it was 2,976, but right just shy of 3,000.
Right.
And it was just due to it was a true great moment, knowing that ordinary Americans were brave enough to go and had the presence of mind to do such an extraordinary act to save somebody else. And as a result of that, we had the casualty figure much less than what we feared.
And sometimes I think we forget about what an incredible job NYPD and FDNY did. I mean, they were obviously almost canonized immediately afterwards because of their heroic efforts. I mean, just incredible the things that they did. But it's been so long, we forget these, and we're going to go through a few of them, but these touching photos of these guys just like covered in soot. And
yeah, I mean, 70 pounds going up the stairs while everybody's coming down the stairs to go to save a life of somebody else. But what I was also very struck by just the actions of ordinary Americans,
right,
who were just willing to do dangerous things to save not just themselves, but a complete stranger.
Right. And at the same time, and it's not talked about a lot because I think, again, it was the Pentagon, but the Pentagon is burning, right? And we're having a first responder effort going on there. And I actually had a friend that was involved with that, and he was just he was wrecked. But here's a photo of a helicopter and the firefighting and what was happening here. And is Rumsfeld still out there trying to save people, obviously, I guess. And but didn't you guys have like some sort of an incident where you thought like one of the first responders was a bogey? Or
what we had, the incident you're referring to is at one point the White House Secret Service picked up an unidentified aircraft. When they don't know what it is, whether it's friend or foe, good guy or bad guy, they end up calling it a bogey.
Right.
So the White House was now declaring that we had a bogey aircraft 8 miles out, low and fast, heading for the White House. So we talked to the Pentagon. This is all happening about 10:15, 10:20
Right.
in the morning. And we're talking to the Pentagon looking for a fighter aircraft in the area that can engage this aircraft before it reaches the White House.
Right.
And we're counting down at this point.
And because the Pentagon is so big and so well structured, like literally 95% of the building is still functional. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Pentagon was housing 27,000 people that morning.
Right. And only not only, but 200 plus servicemen and civilian people working at the Pentagon died that day.
Yes.
Right.
And a lot had to do with that portion of the building was just renovated. And a lot of people had not moved back into that portion of the building. So it didn't have its full complement of office workers, contractors, military members. We were lucky on that front. But this aircraft then, we were counting down to the vice president, who's now talking to the Pentagon, that this unidentified aircraft was 5 miles, 4 miles, 3 miles. We were willing to try to shoot this aircraft down before it reached the White House. And then lo and behold, at the very last second, we found out it was not a bogey aircraft or an unidentified aircraft. It was, in fact, a medevac helicopter, an Army medevac helicopter that was rushing out of Fort Belvoir, just south of Washington, D.C., to get these doctors to the Pentagon to assist with all the burn victims. But when they called Reagan National Airport, Reagan Tower was evacuated. So there was nobody to give them clearance into the White House airspace, or I should say Washington, D.C. airspace.
Right.
So they, coming through the airspace, they were almost targeted, to be shot down. And we're just lucky that fog of war in that scenario there worked out for us, and we didn't kill an Army helicopter going to save lives.
It's shocking. And I'm going to show a photo from the actual bunker with Cheney and Dr. Rice and everybody else in the bunker. And where are you, Bob?
I'm right behind the presidential seal. So that's a room that you'll never see because it is full of military hardware, in the sense of military communication gear, computers, and that's why it's off limits to the public or to the White House staff.
So the blue light. Now, I remember, and I'm sorry to try to add a moment of levity to this, but it's so serious. Maybe we can use it a little bit. Didn't you have a moment with Dr. Rice?
So, Dr. Rice, first of all, I want to start off by saying she's my hero. She's an unbelievable person. She was down there, and I had a few moments with her. One of them was when she came over to me, and I was a major at the time, and she goes, "Major, do you think I could use your phone, my telephone? I really need to call home." And I'm thinking to myself, the National Security Advisor of the United States just asked me permission to use my phone. And I was like, "Yes, ma'am, feel free." And she ended up calling her family down in Alabama to tell them that she was okay. And I immediately took that opportunity to let my wife know that I was busy working, and I would talk to her when I talked to her. But I'll never forget that moment, how she was nice enough to actually ask me to use my phone, in time of such intensity.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then did you not tell her the truth once or something like that?
Well, she started asking me this later on the morning, and we were looking for the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the House being a major player in the legislative branch, and we needed to get him out of Washington, D.C., and she was tracking his whereabouts. And when he didn't check in to his secure site, she immediately came over to me asking me questions about where I knew he was going to be, and could I help her. And naturally I jumped in with both feet to say, "Yes, ma'am, I can help." But the fact of the matter is I didn't really have any answers for her either. And but I thought clearly and on my feet quickly, and sure enough, I was able to go through the White House switchboard out to this military this helicopter squadron that moved the Speaker of the House, and we found out that he was the location we wanted him to be in.
Right. Well, let's shift back to the recovery and the ongoing efforts to get this fire down. And we still had another tower that ended up going down that night. So that it was very important that people were evacuated and that those structures were not killing or hurting other people. That's how severe the damage was up there. Here's a photo by a woman named Ruth Fremson. This police officer just doubled over. You can see a couple other firemen in the background, just staggering. Can you tell us, like, kind of your own perspective, what you think when you see this?
You know, what I think is war zone. I think they're at the heart of it. They're in true combat. They are, you know, like the term we so overly use, but they're at ground zero. And they don't know how many of their colleagues, coworkers, and friends are still living or dead. They have no idea on the status of their families. They are just professionals doing their job until the very last breath. You know, for folks like you and me, they're just giving it their all, and we just caught them at a moment of pure exhaustion, mental and physical exhaustion. And it's a great reminder of the true sacrifice of the people that we entrust our lives to every day to defend us and to protect us and service us. So great photo.
Yeah. And, you know, also, I think like there was an epic photo. I chose not to use it just because I think it's been seen a lot, but of the chaplain being carried out, who was mortally wounded, giving last rites when one of the towers came down. Just horrible, these images. And then here's an image of ground zero, which is after everything's down. It looks like it's a night shot, and you see all the smoke everywhere. It's just insane.
You know, they were telling us at this time that there was 13 stories of carnage. They said there was no desks, escalators, computers, phones. There is nothing you can pick up in that pile that you can actually determine what it is, because at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, everything just eviscerates itself into ash, glass, and twisted steel. And beams that two people couldn't, you know, put their arms around were torn and deformed and reshaped from the enormous heat that generated, the friction of those floors coming down on top of themselves with all that jet fuel and fire. It's just true Armageddon. I mean, you couldn't have drawn another photo or taken another photo of Armageddon that captured it any better than that.
Yeah, it's like a horrible Marvel scene almost. And in the lower right corner, you have this lone fireman walking up the stack up towards the smoke. It's just, wow.
And, you know, for 3 weeks after or longer, it was not a recovery mission. It was still a rescue mission in their eyes.
Wow.
They were bucket by bucket looking for their coworkers or friends or colleagues who just might be trapped and still alive.
Yeah, here's a picture of a guy 4 days later. How long did this thing burn and smoke?
It burned for weeks.
Yeah.
There was really places too hot to touch for weeks after. You know, the main fire was out, but it underneath all that rubble, you know, there's fire still burning. There's pockets of flames.
Mm. And in DC with the Pentagon, how long did that go?
The Pentagon was put out quicker than the towers at ground zero, but I think that it burned through the night, especially in the roof. They got the fire out on the ground, but the risk at the Pentagon was the rafters within the Pentagon roof caught fire, and now the fire was running under its shingles and spreading around throughout the roof complex, where they were literally chasing it for hours and hours to try to, you know, head it off and stop it from spreading. There was literally talk that we could lose the entire roof of the Pentagon if, you know, these first responders didn't, you know, come up with a game plan to save it.
Wow. That's crazy. And I guess recently we just had the Notre Dame Cathedral kind of burned down. That was a similar situation where they thought they were going to lose the whole thing, but obviously under much different circumstances. So I'm going to ask you a couple personal questions.
Sure.
But I know that, you know, having lived through something like this and having been not in the same situation, but in intense periods of work where you just cannot feel or think, really, you just have to act. What was it like for you coming down from this?
You know, being in it, first of all, I just want to back up to say in it, my training kicked in.
Right.
As a military officer, you're trained to deal with what's right in front of you and to, make a decision based on the information you have available and support the overall command structure or cause. In this case, we were all supporting Vice President Cheney. The next day, they released me to go back home to my family too. And then, I'd be back the next day. So this is now Wednesday morning. And I drove past the Pentagon. The roads were empty. The firefighters were still at the Pentagon. The main fire was out, but they were doing some triage, or there was still smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. And I remember driving home as rapidly as I could to go and see my wife. And I had two boys. They were 7 and 4 at the time. And I remember coming through the front door to greet her. We greeted each other. And I just started regurgitating my entire last 24 hours. Every timestamp, every event that I could remember was just flowing out of me. And I didn't even look at her. I was just, recapping my entire, one-day history. And I looked down at her, and she was sobbing because she had heard that we potentially shot Flight 93 down. And here I was going through the whole steps leading up to the decision to shoot Flight 93 down.
Wow.
And we literally, both of us were in tears. And I was like, we didn't shoot it down. We didn't shoot it down. But we literally had to stop talking to each other, to walk away, to decompress, to come back later on under a calmer situation and, start talking about what just happened to America, what this means for our family, for our boys, for our country, for our friends, because we're from a military community, as we know that we're all going to go off and the world's never going to be the same again.
Right. You knew you were going to go to fight. Afterwards, we had these incredible tributes. Baseball shut down. The president threw out the first pitch up at Yankee Stadium, right, which was appropriate given everything that had happened up in New York. And I think the Yankees wore, if I remember correctly, they either wore NYPD or FDNY hats.
Right.
And then we had the blue lights up after a while for the towers, and we'll show that photo now. And we turned 9/11 into Patriot Day, which was supposed to be a day of service. As this country has moved through those years to now, how do you see 9/11 and how we embraced it and reacted to it and responded to it and continue to respond to it?
It's a great question. And I want to tell you, we all had the pride. It was such a moment of national pride to see every American flag on every household, down every street and every block in every city. And we realized that's what we needed to come together as a country.
Right.
Well, then the business of the country then continues. So before long, people will start, going back to their normal lives. But it's incumbent. It's now a mission of mine that we never forget 9/11. It's a mission of our first responders to make sure we never forget, and so many others who are doing their part to make sure we never forget, because we're still a nation at war. We still have enemies out there trying to do us harm. We saw it in the Boston bombing. We see it in the nightclub shootings. We see it, in terrorist attacks around our globe, the rise of ISIS, the fight with Al Qaeda. You see what's going on. And, it comes down to the wolves and the sheeps, and we're trying to get everybody to be more resilient, to be more prepared, to be more ready so we don't have another event like 9/11. And that's my mission. And I got my mission statement from President Bush when in front of a joint session of Congress around September 20th.
I remember.
He said he would not forget to wound to our country and those who inflicted it. He will not yield. He will not rest. He will not relent in waging this struggle for freedom and the security of the American people, and neither will I.
Thank you so much for coming out and joining us. For those of you that are just getting back into the episode or weren't part of the first one, the book, again, is 24 Hours Inside the President's Bunker. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Darling, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. Thank you, Bob, for your service to the country. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Geoff.
All right. Take us out, Panama.
Thanks for listening to the Show Me podcast with Geoff Livingston. More shows, sponsorship, and donation information are available at showmepodcast.com.